All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today to talk about the topic of lessons community and smaller foundations can learn from the evaluation approaches of large foundations. Before we begin, we'd like to turn it over to Jessica Wechter from GEO for a few words. Jessica, if you wait one moment, the lines will be unmuted and you'll be able to speak to us.
You are now in talk mode.
Hi, everybody, and thanks, Johanna. As Johanna said, I'm Jessica Wechter with GEO on our Scaling What Works initiative. I want to first welcome everybody back who joined us last week for our webinar on portfolio versus grant level evaluations, and thank those of you who are joining us for the first time for being with us today. As always, I want to thank my colleagues Johanna and Ehren, who you're going to hear from more in a minute with Innovation Network for the conversation we're about to have, as well as to my colleague Marisa Allen from the Colorado Health Foundation. The foundation, along with a handful of other grant makers we're going to draw our examples from today, are all part of the GEO community. And collectively, we are working to help our grantees achieve more meaningful results, and we're doing that by promoting strategies and practices that are contributing to nonprofit success. As those of you who have been with us for the two webinars or in our workshops know that this is probably one of many offerings from GEO and our Scaling What Works initiative. And our website, which is scalingwhatworks.org, has more information about how you can get involved. We'll talk more about this later, but also just please bookmark that site and check it out, as well as the Innovation Network site, where you'll be able to soon access the recordings from today's conversation, as well as the slides, handouts, resources we mentioned, as well as all these materials from last week's webinar. So just quickly a little bit about GEO. As I said, we are a community of grant makers who know that we are only successful to the extent that our grantees can achieve meaningful results. And we want to help our nonprofit grantees tackle head-on, deep-rooted problems. And we know that one of the ways that we can help reach this goal is by taking every opportunity to take stock of what we're learning and sharing this broadly and transparently with others. So I'm excited to hear from our presenters, and then in our discussion, all of you, about what is working in this area or challenges you may have. Of course, we don't want to give the impression that the practices we're going to put forward from a select number of members today are the best approach or the right approach. We all have to approach evaluation in a way that makes sense for our organizations and for our grantees. And so I encourage everyone today to share. Thanks. And with that, welcome again, and back to you, Johanna and Ehren.
For those of you that were not on the webinar last week, we just wanted to quickly introduce our organization and ourselves. We are Innovation Network. We're a nonprofit evaluation consulting firm based in DC. And my name is Johanna Morariu, and I'm a director at Innovation Network, and I work with a variety of nonprofit and philanthropic clients to do all types of evaluation. And my colleague Ehren is also here today.
And I'm Ehren Reed. Johanna and I are co-directors at Innovation Network, and I've been with the firm for just over a decade. During that time, I've led a wide range of evaluation projects with funders, both large and small.
And we're going to introduce to you Marisa Allen, that's joining us, as well as a co-panelist.
Yes. Hello, everybody. This is Marisa Allen. I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation at the Colorado Health Foundation, which is located in Denver, Colorado. And I'll be talking a little bit about our evaluation model towards the end of the webinar.
We were just going over the agenda very quickly. After we talk about the Packard Foundation's the standards, we're going to go over 4 lessons that are drawn from the evaluation practices of large foundations. And then we're going to turn it over to Marisa Allen of the Colorado Health Foundation to hear from her about their evaluation approaches. And then we're going to have about 10 to 15 minutes at the end to have some informal discussion and question and answer.
So the first example we wanted to share comes from the Packard Foundation and offers one of the best comprehensive and practical descriptions of how a foundation can or should plan, implement, and evaluate its activities. The standards are about 5 years old, and they're the results of the collaborative efforts of Packard's program officers, their evaluation staff, their leadership, and some outside consultants. They break down the life cycle of a foundation strategy into 5 areas, beginning with the formative articulation and development of a strategy all the way through implementation and evaluation. At each stage, it offers detailed descriptions of who needs to be involved staff-wise and what projects need to be developed. The full document, the full standards, are about 100 pages long. Actually, I think a little over 100 pages long. But in case you didn't want to dive into that full depth, the first 23 pages or so can be excerpted as a sort of executive summary. This hefty resource also includes helpful templates, worksheets that you can copy for your own efforts. So we're going to briefly walk through each of the 5 phases described in the standards, pausing a bit more on phase 5 to discuss their recommendations regarding evaluation specifically.
Okay, so the standards begins with the first phase, idea collection, and this is a phase of grant making that occurs mostly before grants are made. So this is grant making before grants. Any grants made in this stage would be more along the lines of research grants or planning grants to help foundation staff investigate an issue, figure out the players involved on an issue, and figure out strategy options for the long run. In this phase of the standards, this really draws on that issue-level research that we talked about last week and other modes of data collection and learning. And again, these are other types of data collection and learning approaches that can be used to inform a strategy or inform the development. And so this here would be a good fit for the idea of strategic learning. And if any of you would like more information on the idea of strategic learning and the approaches, the evaluation approaches that sync up with strategic learning, I encourage you to go to the website of the Center for Evaluation Innovation and check out their strategic learning brief. And phase 1 is largely about idea collection and generation. Traditional evaluation tools and approaches aren't a fit here because there's really not programmatic work or strategy work to be evaluated yet. So in summary, this phase is about laying the groundwork for a future grant-making strategy. And so any research or evaluation tools you could use here would be used to inform that strategy development.
Phase 2 involves narrowing the world of opportunities available to a foundation down to what makes the most sense at this time. And Packard offers 4 questions to help in this process. The first is, why this timing? What is the current window of opportunity? How can the issue be positively impacted at this time? So for example, the Packard Foundation makes considerable investments towards environmental issues, and it argues that if it were not to act on those issues now, the ensuing damage to the environment would be irreversible. So one of the issues it deals with is responsible fishing, arguing that if it didn't act now, entire species of fish could be wiped out from overfishing. The second is, why your foundation? Each foundation will bring different issue area expertise, different relationships, different resources to the table. So determining whether you have the right tools to address the issue or whether you would be better served focusing your efforts elsewhere. The third is this proposal supported by a compelling logic model? So can you plausibly describe through a cause and effect relationship how your foundation's activities would lead to positive outcomes on the issue? And if you can't, then you may not want to consider it. And then finally is, will this be a high impact investment? So how much funding are you willing to commit to the issue, and how does that number compare to your estimate of the total amount of resources and time required to solve the problem? Are you really able to make a dent on the issue? And so consider also in that, who else is funding this issue? Is there a way to use your funding to maybe leverage additional dollars and support? And what would happen if you did not invest?
Great. And phase 3 is when a portfolio strategy is formulated and confirmed. And so it begins with tools like theory of change and logic model, also desired outcomes. And in this phase is when a preliminary budget would be formulated. And so this is really the phase where more evaluation tools and approaches are expected or relevant. And it's the beginning of the right time to start using them. And so the program officer has vetted his or her ideas internally at a foundation, and now they're formulating that strategy and getting ready to get that strategy off the ground. So the 3 key evaluation tools that are used in phase 3 are theory of change, an evaluation plan, and an outcomes plan. And those documents have roughly similar information. They overlap in some ways, but they have slightly different focus and purpose. So the 3 documents, across the 3 documents, they contain common evaluative information such as assumptions, rationales, context, alignment with the foundation, resources, target population, activities, outcomes, and metrics. So that's a big mouthful. But all those things that I just said, we've all seen some way or another in a theory of change document or in an evaluation plan or in a logic model somewhere. And so the primary audience of those tools are other foundation program staff, managers, and foundation leadership. In sum, that information contained in those documents will be used for managing the portfolio and shepherding it towards its destination. So it's all useful information that will be used to make sure the portfolio continues to progress as expected.
In phase 4, we're getting more specific now about the elements of your strategy. We're taking things to action. In this stage, we're going to include 3 different plans. The first is a funding plan that identifies how many resources and over what duration will need to be invested. The second is a draft evaluation plan that identifies how you're going to learn from and assess your efforts as the strategy is implemented. Here we can revisit those 3 questions that Paul Brest asked from last week. Where are you going and how will you know if you have arrived? How do you plan to get there and why do you think your plan will succeed? And how will you know if you're on course? Those are the kind of questions you're going to want to answer in your evaluation plan. And then finally, also consider an exit plan that describes by when you believe success will be achieved, but also the circumstances under which you may need to withdraw support and how that exit will be negotiated.
And in phase 5, all of the hard work culminates as the strategy is implemented. This is also where the monitoring is ongoing to assess portfolio strategy implementation and also to understand progress towards that strategy's goals. There's ongoing learning to identify what is working, what isn't working, and where course corrections can be made. Evaluation tools that correspond to this phase include a learning plan or agenda, a portfolio-level dashboard, mid-course or final reviews, as well as an outcomes evaluation. And this is really the time for the thorough, systematic monitoring, evaluation, and learning to best support that strategy implementation, both to support it and then also be assessing it. And in phase 5, at the end of phase 5, it's not just the end of the whole standards, the whole approach. It cycles back to phase 2 of the standards, and again, kind of reflecting our evaluation model we shared last week, where this is an iterative process. Information learned in this run-through of the standards in these 5 phases feeds back into the next phase to ensure that the next round of grant strategy is even stronger and has even more information to draw on. And also the advisements in this phase are in line with GEO support for foundations to be engaged in continuous learning to inform and drive improvement. And so all of this kind of is telling you the same thing. You need this good information to make sure your work is progressing and getting smarter as you go along.
So now, in addition to the more comprehensive example offered to us from Packard, we wanted to share 4 more specific lessons drawn from larger foundations' approaches to evaluation. So the first comes from the largest foundation of them all. 2 years ago, the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation published what they called a Guide to Actionable Measurement that articulates the foundation's approach to measuring and using its results. Let me first comment on their choice of language in the title of this publication, Actionable Measurement. So Gates here is underscoring that evaluation should only be designed with use in mind. The results should be used to inform the foundation's decisions and their actions. Faye Twersky, who was actually one of the authors for this guide, was recently a guest blogger for the Center for Effective Philanthropy just in this last week, and echoed this point once again. In her post, she argued that we shouldn't look for an evaluation gold standard in methodology. I think many of you might be aware of the argument in the evaluation field over the dubbing by some of randomized trials as the gold standard. I'm making quote fingers for those of you who can't see. So Faye argues that there is no methodological gold standard, and rather that the gold standard in evaluation should be that the results get used. So also in their guide, Gates stresses that evaluation should not aim to measure everything that can be measured. Instead, each evaluation should be adapted to the context and to the needs of what you are evaluating. And so they offer what they call the actionable measurement matrix to help you decide where your evaluation efforts should focus depending on the scope of what you are evaluating. And some of this will seem familiar from last week's conversation. So if you are measuring a particular grant, focus on the questions of monitoring performance and tracking progress. So you're focusing on capturing activities, outputs, and short-term outcomes. But on the other hand, if your evaluation efforts are focused on a strategy, or in the language of last week, on an entire portfolio, you're going to focus instead on capturing changes to longer-term outcomes, population level, or systems changes.
Right. So lesson 2, we're drawing from the Annie Casey Foundation. And the mission of the Casey Foundation is to build better futures for disadvantaged children in the U.S. And those of you familiar with the foundation know that they collect and use data in a variety of complementary ways. And so this lesson here is really about using data from multiple sources about multiple things and putting it together. And so, for example, the Casey Foundation continues its multi-year project called Kids Count, which collects data nationwide on child well-being. And I'm sure actually probably most of you have heard of Kids Count because it's very well known for the breadth and depth of its data collection. And so the Kids Count data is used by the Casey Foundation as well as being publicly available. And the Casey Foundation, its grantees, its partners, organizations that are working on child well-being use the Kids Count data to formulate their program or advocacy strategies. And so the data is not just, collected on an issue and set aside, but it's really used heavily by those programs and organizations that are focused on child well-being. In addition to doing kind of that issue-level research, the Casey Foundation also collects data on the Foundation's progress, on the Foundation's, goals and strategies and their accomplishments in those areas. And so internally, there's a lot of informal assessment and learning. There are kind of internal review sessions where staff present their work and other staff give them feedback and kind of poke holes in their theories or push them to further refine their strategies and their assumptions. There's also, higher level, at the portfolio level or at the kind of sets of portfolios, there's review and questioning of strategy. And then kind of more formally or more systematically, there are also other types of evaluations like implementation evaluations, outcomes evaluations, and even impact evaluation of specific grants, of specific portfolios or other bodies of work. Sometimes even RCT or randomized controlled trial types of evaluation when appropriate. And so you can really see this is a broad variety of types of data that's being collected and used together to better inform the work, and in the long run probably have a lot more impact because of the breadth of data that's at their fingertips.
Now moving on to lesson 3, one of GEO's evaluation pillars actually states, it's about learning with others, not alone. One of the best examples of this policy comes from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and the publications and research section of their website is a veritable gold mine of data and information related to health and healthcare issues facing the United States. In a subsection of that site, the foundation regularly posts the findings from all of the evaluations, or most of the evaluations it commissions, at a frequency of about one new evaluation report going up every month. So the evaluations are stored in a searchable database in which you can peruse the findings by program area, by geographic location, by target population. The database also includes not just the findings from their evaluations, but evaluation tools and methods that you can actually grab and modify for your own purposes. Just another note on transparency. Transparency involves embracing failure and owning when you do not achieve your desired results and learning from that experience. There's a great quote actually from the GEO Council of Foundations Evaluation and Philanthropy publication that says, the failure of a grant-making strategy or an initiative can produce learning that will lead to better results in the future. Using evaluation methods, a grant maker can put a failed project to good use by capturing and sharing widely the lessons about what happened, why the project fell short of expectations, and how the grant maker and its partners can achieve better results in the future. So I think there's a lot that we can gain from increased transparency in this field.
The final lesson is drawn from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. And so I'm sure you're also familiar with Paul Brest, who's a very outspoken person in our field, the president of the Hewlett Foundation. And Paul is an outspoken advocate of outcome-oriented philanthropy or strategic philanthropy. In fact, he just recently penned an article for the Stanford Social Innovation Review on the topic in the spring 2012 issue. And that's publicly available, so if you're interested, just Google it, and I'm sure you'll be able to find it. So Paul advocates for philanthropy for foundations to be the goal setters and to fund grantees that can help reach those goals. In practice, this approach often looks like a program officer crafting a foundation or portfolio-level theory of change, and then selecting grantees whose work points towards the same goals. On the other hand, this idea of balancing the strategic philanthropy with letting go. Christy Kimball, a Hewlett Foundation program officer, penned an article last year, also in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, also in the spring. And in that article, she discussed the merits of a very different approach. And her approach she was advocating for was about enabling effective nonprofit organizations to take the lead in designing solutions to social problems. So instead of the foundation being in the driver's seat on strategy, putting the nonprofits, putting the grantees in the driver's seat on strategy. And so Christy's approach calls for foundations to dial back their control over strategies and programs and to allow nonprofit staff the room to innovate and change course. And so you can see that those are two fairly different approaches, to what is the role of philanthropy in solving these social challenges. But you can see there might be times when one makes more sense, or depending on your foundation's culture, when one is a better fit than the other. Extending these ideas to evaluation, there may be times when it makes more sense for foundations to drive the focus of evaluation, and other times when it makes more sense for grantees to lead the process. So it's all about assessing the situation and matching the approach rather than being a one-size-fits-all. And so to sum up what we've talked about thus far, there are a number of good lessons and resources that we can learn from large foundations. For example, the Standards is an excellent resource that many foundations and nonprofits benefit from. It's an incredibly well-documented approach. But don't think that the big foundations have all the answers figured out. And just because some of these approaches we talked about do work for larger foundations or for these specific organizations we've talked about, it doesn't mean that it's going to work in every situation, and it doesn't mean it's going to work, especially in contexts that are very different. We just wanted to share these examples as hopefully ones that will spark ideas for your work, but by no means are we saying that they're the right size for everyone. So now we're going to turn it over to Marisa to hear about the evaluation approach of the Colorado Health Foundation.
Thanks to both of you for sort of that overview. And I was asked to sort of talk about our evaluation model, and I often learn best by hearing about other people's work and by example. So I'm going to try to make this, as concrete as I possibly can, and then we'll leave some time for questions at the end. And if you guys can advance the slide, I'll kind of just talk about our approach to evaluation. So we, in 2008, developed 12 metrics that we call measurable results. So as you all know, and both of the presenters spoke to, you sort of have to choose which evaluation model you're going to go with. You can't choose all 75. So we decided that we would develop 12 metrics, as I mentioned, that are called measurable results that are linked directly to our funding strategies. So to give an example, we do a fair amount of funding in healthy living. These are programs that try to prevent obesity across the state of Colorado. So we have a metric in our evaluation model that tracks increases for physical activity. Our intention there was to come up with an indicator that over the long term, we know that if people increase physical activity levels, eventually that will lead to better health outcomes. So we developed the evaluation department really in tandem with our philanthropy department and in long conversations with philanthropy staff, which metrics would be directly related to our funding strategies. And one of my most exciting days at work was a couple months ago when I was talking to a program officer, and she was talking to me about how she really uses our evaluation metrics in ongoing conversations with potential grantees. That when she has a conversation with someone who is interested in receiving some funding from us about their work, she is really using our evaluation metrics as the anchor for the conversation. So when I say, that's a term that's often thrown around a lot, our metrics or our measures are linked to funding strategies. But what does that really look like? It looks like that program staff are using those evaluation metrics in conversations with grantees. So if someone is considering funding something, one of our program officers may say, well, we are trying to change one of the following 12 things. How might your work fit in with that? Just to give an example. So as I mentioned, the measurable results are really the cornerstone of our approach. About 80% of our grantees are tracking one or more of these metrics. So you may want to know what's happening with the other 20%. So not every proposal that we fund is able to impact one or more of these metrics. So we do utilize other forms of contract evaluation, and I think I talked about this last week, that we had some interest in tracking the impact of our funding of school-based health centers. So we hired some contract evaluators to look at that cohort of grants and to use the language that we've talked about today and last week, really looking at a portfolio-level analysis that we're examining a cluster of about 17 grantees there. And I want to go to the next slide and talk about some things that have worked fairly well and not so well. I liked the part about, I think if you interviewed all the folks in foundation settings that are working on evaluation, I don't think we figured it all out yet by any means. That I feel like it's an area that we're really developing the right methodologies and combinations of methodologies to assess the impact of our work and our grantees' work. So I feel like on the positive side, I think what our model does pretty well is that we really are able to roll up some of our results and talk about our portfolio level or foundation level analyses. Next week, I'm presenting to our board of directors, and I'm really focusing on really foundation level analyses, like what did we do cumulatively? And because we have 12 metrics that we can roll up together, I'm able to do that kind of analysis. The other strength that I feel like we have in our model, and I hope others would agree here at the foundation, is that I like to say I try to work myself out of a job, that it's building the evaluation capacity of other staff here, that I train other people how to think like an evaluator so that our program officers really are serving as evaluators. We have a staff of 3 evaluators here at the foundation in the research and evaluation department, but we have a staff, I believe it's 13 in philanthropy. So it's a train-the-trainer model is employed, that program officers are trained in evaluation so that there's a big tribe of us working on these kinds of activities. The other part that many people ask me about is where is our evaluation department within the foundation? We are an independent from the program or philanthropy department where we report to a different boss, but we work very, very collaboratively, and sometimes I feel like you couldn't really tell what department that our team is really on, in, because we work very much so in concert with the program staff. One piece of our model that I think is somewhat unique and I'm very proud of is that our evaluation department reviews all grant proposals. So we are part of the grant review process, and that is about 200 grant proposals a year. And what that means is that we are really collaborative in the process. We're primarily reviewing proposals, looking at how things are being measured and evaluation components. But of course, we end up talking about other pieces related to strategy and questions that hopefully are of interest and of help to others. And then on the challenges side, we always deal with measurement issues. How, for example, if we have a that's working on, are you guys still there?
Yep.
If we're working on a grant that's working on integrated care, whether or not that particular grantee is measuring it the same way as 15 other grantees. And we by no means have that figured out, but we're getting better at it. And as many people would agree, the data collection capacity of grantees varies. And one thing that we found that was sort of counterintuitive is that we expected some grantees that were new to collecting data to perhaps struggle with our model. And there was some of that, but we actually found the flip side, that some large organizations that were really, really good at collecting data, that had sophisticated data collection systems that they also struggled with giving. We are collecting very standard, simple data points. We're asking for sort of a very small amount of data, one sort of stream of data, and that was something that surprised us, that some grantees weren't able to give us the information in maybe the way that we were asking for it. The other challenge is data delays. So right now, it's 2012. My team and I are working on analyzing data from grants that were approved in 2009, 2010. So because, like many foundations, we ask grantees to report to us about yearly, sometimes in a different time frame. But we are continuing our grant making and turning data and analyzing data based on grants that were made 2 to 3 years ago. And then finally, the challenge of measuring system change and advocacy, I feel like we really haven't tackled that well, and I feel like that will be something that in the future we'll look to do better. And I'm happy to take questions now, or people can contact me after through email. I think it's on the last slide if you have other questions.
Great, Marisa. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Marisa? So Marisa, I have a question, and I'll kick us off here. I'm curious about the process of getting to the 12 metrics. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about, who was involved in that and about how long it took?
Yeah. So from my understanding, because it was in 2008 before my time, but I have interviewed staff that were involved in that process, that it took, first it began with our board of directors coming up with some new strategies related to our funding. And out of that process of strategic planning, we also began looking at evaluation. I know that's really the typical trajectory of many organizations that are starting to look at evaluation, that evaluation metrics often come out of the process of looking at strategic planning. In our case, it came directly from a process of the board of directors developing some new funding strategies and then wanting to talk about how will we know whether or not that's going well.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
So like we mentioned at the outset, slides, additional resources, and an evaluation will be sent to all participants, so look for an email. And this session was recorded and will be available a few days from now on the Scaling What Works microsite and the Innovation Network website. For more evaluation resources, visit GEO's website, the Scaling What Works website, and Innovation Network's website. There's a plethora of evaluation resources out there for you. And also, I'd like to turn it over to Jessica at GEO and try to get a wrap-up from GEO. And I'm getting some notes here that some people might not be able to hear because of sound issues, but we'll keep powering through, and hopefully most of you can still hear us. So Jessica, any closing words?
Hi, thanks Johanna and Ehren, and especially thank you to Marisa for sharing a little bit about the Colorado Health Foundation. Per what Johanna was just saying, I would want to encourage anyone who maybe is attempting to speak and ask a question to please feel free to type it to me or to Johanna in the chat box, and we will be happy to recite the questions if you can't speak up because of the ongoing sound issues. Just want to apologize for those problems. Thank everyone for being with us, and please take a look at the websites that Johanna mentioned that are on the slide you see in front of you to access the recordings and what we have next in store from Scaling What Works. Thanks again.